Hello, geometry. We just wanted to review finding slope. Slope is something we learned about in Algebra 1, but it is a concept that we do have to use in geometry. So this video is just reminding us, giving us a refresher on how to find slope. Well, what is slope? Slope is just the steepness of the line. So how steep the line is. You can have a positive slope, which is increasing, a negative slope, which is decreasing, or horizontal slope, which is 0, or undefined, which is vertical. So we're about to refresh you right here on how to find slope. Well, this first box right here is rate of change. Rate of change is basically what slope is, the change in y over the change of x. My dependent variable over my independent variable. Now this right here, I can use this mainly when I'm thinking about word problems. They say the word per, so per price, per mile, per whatever. That's going to help me out when I'm finding slope. It can be written like this. Now I can also have it in an equation. The best equation is y equals mx plus b, slope-intercept form. So whenever an equation is in slope-intercept form, that can help me find slope. Where my m is the slope and my b is the y-intercept. If your equation is not in slope-intercept form, you want to rewrite it so that it is in slope-intercept form. So y equals 1/2 x plus 3. This is an example equation. If I had this equation, I could automatically know that my slope is 1/2 because that's my m. That's my number in front of x. That's my coefficient. Again, this only works when it's in slope-intercept form. So make sure your equations are in slope-intercept form, and you can always find a slope from the equation by looking for that m. Slope is just a ratio. So we use m for slope. And again, the ratio, change in y over change in x. It's my rate of change. Remember that y is always on top. Now, if I'm looking at a graph, I can do rise over run. So when I'm at a point, I'm going to say, well, what's my vertical change? Over what's my horizontal change? So when you look at a graph, you find the point and you say, okay, how far up do I go to how far over? And that's how you can find your slope. Now in the table, again, I think of the change in y over change of x. I go to my table and I always start with my y's. Well, how is the y changing? How do I get from -2 to -1? I added 1. How do I get from -1 to 0? I added 1. I added 1. Each time I'm adding 1, so my change in y is +1. Then I go to the x. How do I get from -4 to -2? I added 2. -2 to 0, I added 2. 0 to 2, I add 2. So my change in x is 2. That means my slope is 1 over 2. Change in y over change of x. Always make sure you can reduce it. If it can be reduced, reduce the problem. If we do this other example, again, I find my change in y. How do I get from 0 to -3? I add 3. I'm adding 3 each time. So my change in y is a +3. I'm subtracting 3. So that's -3. 0 to -3, subtracted 3. -3 to -6, I subtracted 6. So my change in y is -6. My change in x, 7 to 11, I added 4. 11 to 15, I added 4. So change in x is 4. So my slope is -3 over 4. If I can reduce it, I make sure I reduce it. Now, when you're using a table, these numbers may not always be the same, but they will always reduce to be the same number if that is our slope. Now the last way I'm going to show us finding slope is from 2 points. So if I gave you the point 0, 4 and 6, 2, you can find it any way you did before. So you could graph the 2 points and find your rise over run. You can put your points in the table and see how your y's and your x's are changing, and those will work out. So here, I'll just talk about my change in y over change of x. Again, my first numbers in the coordinates are always my x's. My second number in the coordinates is always my y's. So slope is change in y over change of x. So I go to my y's. How do I get from 4 to 2? I subtract 2. How do I get from 0 to 6? I add 6. So my slope is -2, +6. But I can reduce that. So I will. These are both divisible by 2, so that's -1 over 3. That's my slope. That's one way of doing it. Now, we could also use my slope formula. My slope formula, again, the change in y over change of x. That's when we say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Where again, your x's are your first numbers, the y's are the second numbers. So if I give us another point, let's say -2, 7, and then 2, -1. Change in y. y2, -1 minus y1 is 7. So -1 minus 7, that's a -8, over x2, which is 2, minus x1, which is -2. I remember minus and negative means plus, so 2 plus 2 is 4. So my slope is -8 over 2. Now and again, I can reduce that more because these are both divisible by 2. 4 over 1, which is 4. So my slope is 4. So this is just a reminder of how we find slope. Now here is basically showing us with the graph. Again, with my graph, I would know it's rise over run. But if it's a positive slope, I know that my slope has to be increasing. So from left to right is going up. If it's a negative slope, my slope is going to be decreasing. If it's a slope of 0, that's a flat line. Horizontal line. And if it's undefined, that's my vertical line. So again, positive, you have a diagonal, but it's increasing. Negative is still a diagonal, but it's decreasing. 0 is a horizontal line, and undefined is a vertical line. Now this last part is again asking us from an equation. Well, if I have a slope, I have to have both an x and a y in the equation. So let's say that my equation was 3 is equal to x minus y. Well, this equation is not in slope-intercept form, so I want to put that in slope-intercept form. Again, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So I would first move this y to the other side by adding y. So 3 plus y equals x. Since it was a minus, I had to add it. And then I would subtract 3 from both sides. So y equals x minus 3. So that is my slope. My slope would be the m. When there's no number in front of the coefficient, I know that coefficient is 1. So my slope is 1. So I have a slope of 1, and I find that from the equation. Again, if I had to negative equation, again, I would still have to have an x and a y somewhere in that equation. But the coefficient has to be negative. So -3. My slope is negative because that coefficient is negative. Now, when you have a horizontal line, you only have a y. So that's something like y equals 5. Y equals -3. You only have a y in the equation. When you have a vertical line or undefined, you only have an x. So x only. So I can say something like x equals, let's say, -14. And that is our video on slope.